Have you ever sat down with every intention of starting an important task, writing that report that's due next week, studying for the big exam you've been dreading, finally cleaning the house that's been piling up with clutter for months, or tackling your taxes before the deadline sneaks up again? Only to find yourself, minutes later, scrolling endlessly through social media feeds, watching random videos that have nothing to do with your goals, or suddenly deciding that the fridge absolutely must be reorganized right this second, even though it was fine yesterday. That exact moment of diversion is so familiar to so many people. You're not alone in this pattern. This behavior has a name: procrastination. It's something almost everyone experiences at some point in their lives, from teenagers cramming for tests to highly successful professionals delaying major projects. But why do we do it? Why do we voluntarily choose to delay tasks we fully understand we should complete, even when we can clearly predict that postponing them will only create more stress, tighter deadlines, lower quality work, and often a heap of regret? The explanation isn't as simple as lack of discipline or poor time management. The real answer lies much deeper in our psychology, in the way we process and regulate emotions, and even in the fundamental architecture of how our brains are wired to respond to threats, rewards, and time itself. First, let's clear up one of the most persistent misconceptions surrounding this topic. Procrastination is not simply laziness. Laziness suggests a fundamental lack of desire or willingness to exert effort in any direction. True laziness is passive indifference toward action itself. Procrastinators, however, are often very different. Many of them genuinely want to get things done. They feel the internal tug of responsibility pulling at them. They are fully aware of the negative consequences that will arrive if they keep waiting: missed opportunities, disappointed people, self-imposed pressure, financial penalties, academic setbacks. Yet, despite that awareness, they still put the task off. The real driver behind this seemingly irrational choice is rarely a simple deficit of willpower in the classic sense most people imagine. Instead, procrastination functions primarily as an emotion regulation strategy that has gone off the rails. When a task triggers discomfort, whether that discomfort comes from boredom that makes the activity feel soul-crushing, from overwhelm that makes it seem impossibly large, from anxiety that threatens our self-image as competent or capable, or simply from the lack of any immediate reward, our brain instinctively searches for the fastest path to emotional relief. Delaying the task delivers that relief almost instantly. We escape the negative feelings in the present moment. We sidestep the unpleasant sensation right now, even though we know full well that we will pay a steep price for it later. Crushing stress as the deadline looms, waves of guilt that wash over us in the middle of the night, rushed and mediocre work that doesn't reflect our true abilities, and sometimes even damaged relationships or reputations. That short-term emotional escape is so seductive that it overrides our longer-term intentions again and again. Think about that precise instant when you make the decision to put something off. Notice what happens inside. Almost always, there is a small but unmistakable wave of relief that washes through your body and mind. Your shoulders drop slightly, your breathing eases. That momentary lightness is incredibly powerful. It's not random, it's your limbic system stepping in, the ancient, emotion-driven part of your brain that evolved to keep us safe and comfortable in dangerous environments. The limbic system is laser-focused on immediate emotional comfort and survival needs. It prioritizes feeling okay right now over almost any abstract, long-term goal. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the more recently evolved region responsible for rational thinking, planning, impulse control, and envisioning future outcomes, gets temporarily overridden or drowned out. Picture it this way. Inside your skull, you have an impulsive, emotional toddler throwing a tantrum and a calm, responsible adult trying to reason with them. Too often, the toddler wins the argument simply because it screams louder and more urgently in the present moment. Modern neuroscientists frequently describe this internal conflict as a tug-of-war between the now self and the future self. The now self craves comfort, distraction, and pleasure immediately. The future self is the one who will eventually deal with the fallout: missed deadlines, poor performance reviews, health consequences, or financial strain. Because those future consequences always feel abstract, vague, and psychologically distant, they lose the motivational tug-of-war almost every time. One of the most useful and influential frameworks for explaining why this battle so frequently ends in procrastination is temporal motivation theory, developed by psychologist Piers Steel after years of synthesizing research across disciplines. Steele's model distills the complex psychology of motivation into a surprisingly elegant mathematical equation. Motivation, according to the theory, equals the product of expectancy multiplied by value, divided by the product of impulsiveness multiplied by delay. In everyday language, that means we feel motivated to tackle a task when four key factors align favorably. We have reasonable confidence that we can succeed at it, we place high value on the outcome or find the activity itself rewarding. Our level of impulsiveness isn't pulling us too strongly toward instant distractions, and the reward or consequence isn't pushed too far into the future. Procrastination kicks in whenever that formula spits out a very low number. If the task offers rewards that are months or years away, if we perceive the outcome as having low personal value or meaning, if our impulsiveness constantly drags us toward easier alternatives, or if we have low confidence that we'll actually pull it off successfully, then motivation collapses. In that low motivation state, the brain naturally gravitates toward anything that delivers instant gratification. Checking a new notification that pings, playing one more quick round of a mobile game, grabbing a snack from the kitchen, because those tiny actions produce fast, reliable dopamine hits that make us feel momentarily better. Dopamine is absolutely central to understanding why procrastination feels so automatic and hard to resist. Our brains are biologically wired to chase dopamine, the neurotransmitter most closely associated with anticipation of reward, pleasure, motivation, and learning. Activities that are easy, fun, novel, or socially validating trigger rapid and frequent dopamine releases. They light up the reward pathways almost instantly. Difficult, abstract, long-term, or anxiety-provoking tasks usually trigger far less dopamine, especially in the beginning stages when progress feels slow or invisible. When you sit in front of a work project that feels tedious, confusing, or threatening to your sense of competence, the reward circuitry barely flickers. Meanwhile, anything that promises quick stimulation, social media scrolling, video games with constant feedback loops, YouTube videos that autoplay one after another, delivers small but reliable dopamine pulses every few seconds. These digital environments have been carefully engineered by teams of behavioral psychologists and engineers to maximize engagement through exactly that mechanism. They hijack the very same reward circuitry that should be motivating us to pursue meaningful, delayed reward goals. Over repeated experiences, this creates a powerful habit loop. Discomfort arises, brain seeks relief, procrastination behavior delivers quick dopamine, discomfort temporarily subsides, and the loop strengthens. Before long, procrastination becomes the default, almost reflexive response whenever discomfort appears. Fear is another massive driver, and fear of failure stands out as particularly potent. Many people delay starting precisely because beginning means opening the door to the possibility of imperfection, criticism, judgment, or outright failure. As long as you haven't started, you technically can't have failed yet. Your self-worth remains protected behind the shield of "I haven't tried." This protective mechanism is especially powerful in people with perfectionistic tendencies. Paradoxically, the very desire to do things perfectly becomes one of the strongest fuels for procrastination. The internal logic runs something like this. If I can't produce something exceptional, if it can't be flawless, impressive, or beyond reproach, then I shouldn't even begin. So the project sits untouched until the deadline becomes so close that action is forced. Then the work gets done in a frantic rush. The output is often mediocre or substandard compared to what the person is truly capable of, and intense self-criticism follows. The perfectionist procrastinator becomes trapped in an exhausting cycle. Impossibly high standards paralyze action before it starts. Avoidance temporarily shields the ego from failure, but the eventual rushed product damages self-esteem even more in the long run, reinforcing the belief that they aren't good enough unless everything is perfect. Closely connected to fear of failure is the less discussed but equally real fear of success. For some individuals, completing a task exceptionally well carries its own hidden threats. Success might bring raised expectations from others, more work, more responsibility, more scrutiny, more pressure to keep performing at that level. It might force uncomfortable changes, leaving a comfort zone, taking on leadership roles, or confronting imposter syndrome head-on. In those cases, staying in the familiar territory of unrealized potential feels psychologically safer than stepping into the spotlight of actual achievement. Low self-esteem tends to amplify both fears dramatically. When deep down you doubt your fundamental worth or abilities, every important task starts to feel like a potential confirmation of inadequacy. Starting means risking evidence that you really aren't as smart, talented, or capable as you hope. Delaying postpones that painful proof, at least for a little while longer. Overwhelmed functions as yet another common and massive trigger. When a task appears massive, vague, ill-defined, multi-layered, or incredibly complex, the brain interprets it as a threat. The stress response activates, and the prefrontal cortex, needed for planning, prioritizing, and sequencing, begins to shut down or work less efficiently. Instead of calmly breaking the enormous project into manageable steps, we freeze in place or flee toward anything simpler and less threatening. This is exactly why vague intentions like get in shape, eat healthier, or start my own business produce far more procrastination than ultra-specific micro-goals, such as walk briskly for 30 minutes right after breakfast today, or spend exactly 15 minutes researching available domain names this afternoon. The more concrete and bite-sized the next action becomes, the less emotional resistance it generates. Boredom and a lack of genuine intrinsic interest are equally strong culprits. If a task feels pointless, repetitive, or completely disconnected from anything that matters to us personally, it offers almost no internal reward. Without that sense of meaning, curiosity, or satisfaction, the brain searches elsewhere for stimulation. This pattern shows up especially often in jobs, academic courses, or long-term projects where the daily work feels misaligned with our core values or fails to satisfy basic psychological needs such as autonomy, mastery, or a sense of purpose. Interestingly, procrastination is far from a modern invention. Ancient Greek poets and philosophers were already complaining about it more than 2,700 years ago. Hesiod warned against putting off work until tomorrow in his writings around 700 BCE, yet contemporary life has dramatically amplified the problem. Smartphones, endless push notifications, algorithm-driven feeds, streaming platforms, and infinite digital entertainment options have supercharged our natural impulsiveness to levels our ancestors never experienced. Studies show the average person now checks their phone more than 100 times per day, each glance delivering a tiny burst of novelty or social validation that reinforces the habit. Remote work and flexible schedules, while offering freedom and autonomy, have simultaneously removed many of the external scaffolding, fixed office hours, visible supervisors, and immediate peer accountability that once compelled action even when internal motivation was low. Without those guardrails, the internal emotional battle tilts even more strongly toward delay. Chronic procrastination is remarkably common. Research consistently estimates that about 20% of adults struggle with it as a persistent, pervasive pattern across multiple areas of life, while up to 50% of college students identify as chronic procrastinators during their academic careers. The downstream effects are serious and well documented. Chronic procrastination correlates strongly with elevated levels of stress, chronic anxiety, clinical depression, significantly lower academic grades and performance evaluations, poorer long-term financial decisions, weaker adherence to health behaviors, such as exercise and medical checkups, and even higher rates of strained personal relationships due to broken promises and unreliability. The guilt, shame, and self-recrimination that almost always follow episodes of procrastination feed directly back into the cycle. Feeling bad about ourselves leads to more avoidance as a way to escape the painful emotions, which creates more unfinished tasks and more bad feelings. It becomes a self-perpetuating loop. And yet, despite how widespread and destructive it is, many people suffer in silence. They hide their struggles, convinced that procrastination is a deep personal character flaw rather than a predictable, understandable psychological response shaped by biology, environment, and emotion. The encouraging reality is that understanding these underlying mechanisms hands us real leverage to change the pattern. Procrastination is not an inherent moral defect or proof of weakness. It is a very human response to emotional discomfort, our natural discounting of future outcomes, known as temporal discounting, and incentives that are poorly aligned between short-term feelings and long-term goals. Once we learn to spot the emotional roots, whether it's fear in its many forms, boredom that drains meaning, overwhelm that paralyzes, or low expectancy that kills hope, we gain the ability to choose different responses instead of falling into the automatic avoidance habit. Tiny, frictionless first steps dramatically lower the emotional activation energy required to begin. Committing to work on something for just 2 minutes frequently creates unexpected momentum because the simple act of starting itself begins to generate dopamine and a small sense of agency. Reframing tasks as low-stakes experiments rather than definitive judgments of our worth reduces the fear of imperfection. Practicing deliberate self-compassion, speaking to ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a struggling friend, interrupts the toxic shame cycle that fuels further delay. Setting artificial deadlines, sharing goals with an accountability partner, or using visible commitment devices takes advantage of our natural sensitivity to immediacy and social consequences. In the end, the phenomenon of procrastination reveals something profound and universal about human nature. We are complex creatures, forever caught between the pull of short-term comfort and the call of long-term meaning. Our brains evolved primarily in environments where immediate survival, finding food, avoiding predators, securing shelter, mattered far more than abstract goals set years in the future. Today, we live in a world filled with delayed, often intangible rewards, yet the ancient neural wiring that prioritizes the present moment remains largely unchanged. Understanding this mismatch does not give us permission to procrastinate endlessly, but it does replace crushing self-blame with curiosity, compassion, and strategic action. When we stop viewing procrastination as evidence of moral failure and begin seeing it as valuable information about our current emotional state, our unexamined values, and the environment we've created around ourselves, we acquire practical tools to move forward despite internal resistance. The tug-of-war inside the brain never fully disappears, but with greater awareness and deliberate practice, the rational, future-oriented self can begin to win more of those contests. And every time it does, even in small ways, the entire system gradually rewires itself toward greater action, deeper purpose, and ultimately a quieter, more peaceful relationship with the tasks that matter most. If this resonated with you and you want more practical psychology insights to build a stronger, more focused version of yourself, hit that like button, share this video with someone who's always saying, "I'll do it tomorrow," and subscribe to Better You Daily so you never miss an upload. Turn on notifications too. We drop new episodes every week designed to help you level up your mind and your habits. Thanks for watching. You've got this. One small action at a time. See you in the next video.